And I welcome back once again Mr. David Walls, Executive Director of the Family Foundation, for another great Family Foundation Friday. David, welcome.
Greg, good to be with you again.
Thanks. It's been good. I've enjoyed
Yeah,
this. I don't know if you
absolutely.
have, but we've been getting some good feedback.
We have.
People are hearing it and responding and encouraging. So we thank you for that encouragement. Now we are just past, you're going to tell us a little more about that. We're nearing the end of this short session, aren't we?
Yeah, it'll
And you,
be here before we know it.
Okay, and if you want to hear more of the Authority of Love, check out WJMM.com and go to their podcast tab near the upper right, and then Love and Lordship links, and you'll get today's message and the previous 2 days. Now, there'll be some other messages, but you can go back to loveandlordship.com and find some more there. So I encourage you to go there. Also, David, I know you want to give some contact information, so let's start with that.
Yeah, folks can connect with the Family Foundation at KentuckyFamily.org. It's an important time to stay connected. We're sending out action alerts and weekly updates at the end of the week on important activity that's going on in the General Assembly and just issues impacting public policy here in Kentucky.
And how can they contact their legislator too? Because that's part of what you're going to do. How can they do that?
Absolutely. If on our website at KentuckyFamily.org/take action, we've got some action centers set up where you can send an email message. But I also want to give out the legislative message line, and this is the phone number that you can call the Capitol, and they'll take some information for you based on where you live and connect you so you can leave a message for your state house and state senate member. And that number is 1-800-372-7181. 1-800-372-7181. Greg, I know we're going to be talking about some important issues, important bills, and this is a very important time to be calling the Capitol and encouraging your state house and state senate member and leadership in both chambers to work on important bills.
Yeah, because we made this connection before. You see the banners behind us, the Family Foundation of Kentucky and Love and Lordship. Our heart and our desire in both of our efforts here, ministry and outreach, is to help people be aware, alert, and educated on those things that impact marriage and family, our culture and our community through that. And when we destroy marriage and family, culture and community are in bad shape. So I've blown that line up, by the way, David, over the years. They've got a few hundred, if not a few thousand calls from me, and we'll continue to do so. And we encourage you to do that. So, David, you mentioned some key bills that we've talked about before. You got a couple others. Let me ask first, do no harm and parental rights, because those are a couple that we have covered the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. So, Greg, just to kind of set the stage, last week was essentially the end of last week was the midpoint of the session, but this is only a 30-day session, and it was also the bill filing deadline. So we saw a plethora of bills filed last
All
week.
All good bills, right?
No.
Okay.
Some very good,
Darn.
and some not so good. And we'll update folks on a few of those that we think are pertinent to the family. One of those that you were just mentioning was the Do No Harm Act, what has sometimes been called the Help Not Harm Act. This is an important piece of legislation that is to protect Kentucky children from so-called gender transition services, what we really know to really mean hormone experimentation, potentially mutilation, surgeries, and other things that are just outright appalling that this is actually going on. But we are seeing this increase across the nation. We are seeing Planned Parenthood, for example, here in Kentucky is advertising these services. And so this is House Bill 470, was filed last week by Representative Jennifer Decker. There's a lot of momentum for this issue. There's already 30 plus sponsors of this bill. But look, we're in a moment right now, Greg, and you and I have talked about this, where the assault on the family, and particularly on really Genesis 1, what it means to be created in the image of God as male and female, we are seeing this play out really in just tragic and harmful ways. And one of those ways is in which we're, particularly amongst young people, we are seeing this push for kids to quote unquote identify, this idea that you can identify opposite of your biological sex, opposite of how God created you. And not just that, but now pushing them towards interventions, whether that mean hormone suppressants, whether that mean further on down the line surgeries that mutilate healthy body parts, literally mutilate healthy body parts. we're talking about kids being essentially encouraged to make decisions that are irreversible.
I'm going to add a
Yeah.
word there.
Yeah.
And I want to say this publicly. The kids are not only being encouraged, they're being manipulated.
Yep.
That's what's happening.
No,
They're being
you're right.
manipulated, people and listeners. And so we need to take a stand. I'm going to add a couple things there too.
Yeah.
Do not harm, I believe, comes right out of the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes.
Isn't that
Yeah,
right?
Right.
I mean, that's been around for a long time.
Right.
And I had a doctor tell me literally most of the medical and health and even insurance and pharmaceutical fields now are not trained in health and life. They're trained in death and symptoms.
Right.
That was a medical doctor that shared
Yeah.
that with me. We're trained to find a symptom and treat just the symptom, which means your body continues to, that's not exact issue, but when we encourage and manipulate these young, impressionable children to think that's okay. The other thing is this, and I think you've heard it too, there's a lot of evidence and a lot of pushback now coming out of UK, the United Kingdom, and other places that have had this longer than we have, and they're starting to stop this movement.
Right. Yep.
Because they're finding out it's extremely destructive. So I'll let you pick back up because that also goes back into the parental rights.
Yeah, no,
Right?
no, Greg, you're absolutely right. You know, there was actually just a couple weeks ago, there was an expose that was published by a gender transition worker, someone who is, I believe she described herself as to the left of Bernie Sanders.
I didn't know that existed. But, right.
And so, but had worked at this so-called gender transition clinic in Kansas City. And she just details, almost in graphic detail, what is going on behind the scenes. She had to leave, said I could not in good conscience be involved in what's being promoted.
And remind him
and
again,
done
she
to
was
kids.
a gender transition
Right.
person
She
herself,
said,
right?
I am,
Yeah.
I come from this worldview.
Right.
She says at the beginning of the article, but not only has she left, she now has felt compelled to tell what's going on. And what's going on is kids, like you said, they're being manipulated. Look, young kids don't even have the ability to consent to these kinds of activities.
Brain research shows us
it's,
that, yes.
We're talking about potentially life-altering decisions. And what we also see in this expose and others is that we have just a manipulative medical community in this context that is really preying upon these kids because, look, so many times these things are about dollars.
Yes.
Follow the money. And
Yes.
and when a child walks through the doors and starts heading down this path, you're talking about hormones.
Yes.
For the rest of their
Right.
life, potentially
Right.
surgeries. You're talking about, someone who is looked at as in terms of significant dollar figures. And so, unfortunately, that's what we're seeing happen. But what's also interesting, Greg, in that expose is, and we've seen some of this being talked about broadly as well, but this social contagion factor that is now
Absolutely.
going on.
Right.
Look, we have no
Right.
doubt that there are kids, there are people who struggle with their identity,
Yep.
and the loving thing to do is to encourage them to walk in how that they were created.
Yep.
But these can be real things. But what we
Yes.
are seeing now with it being promoted broadly in the culture, in our schools, is, they talk about situations where literally they were having multiple students from the same school show up at the same time to want to partake in these services.
Yeah.
And so when you start putting this together, you see that we're in a very serious situation as it relates. And so the charge, to bring it back to, we have a moral obligation, a duty and responsibility to ensure that not a single Kentucky kid has these procedures, treatments, I put in air quotes,
Yes.
done on them. These are harmful practices. I can't state it enough. And so this is a moral imperative, I think, one of the most important issues that the legislature needs to address. And again, this is an issue where you're seeing, the media, the LGBT moral revolution movement they understand that this type of legislation really undercuts the very core of their ideology.
Yeah.
And so what we are seeing is just an incredible amount of pressure, media attention, so forth, pushing back against common sense legislation like this. And that's why it's so vitally important in the really just 2 weeks we have until the veto override period starts, for folks to go to our website at kentuckyfamily.org, to send a message via email, and to call the legislative message line that I gave out.
Give it again. Give that again.
1-800-372-7181. It would be a tragedy if we leave this legislative session without taking definitive action, like other states are doing right now as well, to say we are not going to allow our children to be harmed in Kentucky.
And I like the word that you and many others, myself included, have used many times. We don't want our children to be manipulated and mutilated.
Right.
And that's what's happening. And that's, you said life altering, but it also, it likely is going to impact them the rest of their life.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to get out of this some. You also used the word ideology.
Right.
And that's great because there is no real science behind this. They call it that, but there is no real science. The real science stands on the side that we're talking about here. Give us some more updates on that. I know we want to get a few more in here before parental rights, and there's a couple of others I know you mentioned.
Yeah, we have continued to be talking about House Bill 177, the Parents' Rights Protection Act. Look, there are several parental rights bills that are building momentum. That's an important issue to continue to be contacting your legislators about and say we want the strongest possible parental rights bill passed. So that we protect parental rights, but also a part of this is to empower parents to be involved, have access to, and be informed and equipped for anything that's going on in the context
against
of
this
in their
manipulation,
school, right? And to protect against these harmful ideologies that are being taught in school. So that's vitally important. But we'll mention a couple others. I mentioned, Greg, that we passed the bill filing deadline. So there was several other bills that just of note that we'll share. We continue to encourage folks on House Bill 30. That's the Student Privacy Act to protect to just set a common sense policy that says boys use boys' rooms and facilities in schools, girls use girls. Representative Chris Fugit, pastor, great pro-family legislator, he filed House Bill 547. This is a bill to protect the First Amendment rights of students and teachers in light of the Coach Kennedy U.S. Supreme Court decision that was a big victory in the last term last year. So just encourage folks to keep an eye out on that bill. And then in terms of some concerning bills, there was several bills filed that would unfortunately seek to further expand predatory gambling in Kentucky. One that I'll mention is House Bill 551. This is the bill to quote unquote legalize predatory sports betting. Look, we know that gambling harms the family, it corrupts government, and ultimately it's a state-sponsored financial fraud that the state is looking to put upon its people. And so, again, you can get more information about that bill and the harms of it at KentuckyFamily.org.
I'll add something to that and close this out. I had a very fine horseman, and I'll just say that, very high up in the establishments, who said to me when we were talking about this a few years ago, he goes, Greg, we're telling people that we can gamble our way out of debt, and you cannot gamble your way out of debt. And that's the lie.
Right.
That's the predatory gambling. So thank you. Remember, KentuckyFamily.org/take action, right, David?
Yeah.
Take action. And the legislative hotline is 1-800-372-7181. You can reach us at loveandlordship@gmail.com. That's loveandlordship@gmail.com. And we just want to thank you again for joining us. Thanks for taking the time, David. Another one. We'll be back with them again next Friday. I enjoyed this. I think it's good, and I like the feedback. People seem to be encouraged at it.
I hope we have some big updates for next time.
I hope so. Some really good ones. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your prayers. Thanks always to the Lord. Make it a great day, and God bless in Christ. Stay tuned for Bill Reeser and Encounter. I'm Greg.